Well, and I think that part of the problem, just to piggyback on what Charlie and Joe said, is that it's about the collaboration piece that we talked about before, is that if you're working with your boards, mainly inland wetlands and planning and zoning, those are the two boards that would ultimately be involved in various different approvals, depending on the nature of the property and what is involved. But having everybody on the same page would help tremendously. One of the things that I did was when I was on planning and zoning as a member, then as chair, working with Charlie as well, is that we were involved in the Route 1 East-West design, and a tremendous, wonderful amount of folks in the community, completely diverse, a lot of very pro-conservation folks were involved on both ends of that.
We even had a moratorium during that.
Oh, yeah, we had a moratorium during that.
We shut down all development for 6 months or a year just to get it right.
Right.
And then we get somebody and...
Yep, and then, one of the things I had done as chair of the P&Z was to change sort of the structure and how we go about planning and zoning, and that structure is still in place to this day, is that you plan first, zone second. And you have committees, and the committees need to be with more active members in the planning and zoning than just one member serving on the planning committee or one member serving, those are standing committees under the planning and zoning, and they've continued that. But the whole thing with the rock pile, when we zoned the Route 1 west portion, which was where the rock pile was in, and part of the planning of it was what would we envision on these properties? What type of business would we envision being there? And the business that is proposed to go on the current rock pile is exactly the type of business, a smaller scale Clinton with upscale stores. And because this came in as a result of multiple people that were involved in that planning and then subsequently zoning process, and hearing from folks in the community of this type of services they would want, and what would draw us some really positive revenue without a lot of drag, like let's say. Where, certain businesses are great, they might bring revenue, but they also might require a lot of services. And that type of upscale environment, what the rock pile was proposed to be, wouldn't. And then we fast forward, there were a number of folks that were involved in that process over those couple of years that were anti-development completely. So it didn't matter what the business was. They were going to vote against it and make it difficult. And that's not what the regulatory agency should be about.
Right.
If you have a problem with it, that's when you talk about in the planning and zoning stage. And that's not to say that a business should be able to come in and do whatever they want. You still have to follow the regs. We still need to check and make sure that we have appropriate sewage. Sewage was an issue there. But back to the other thing Charlie talked about with people getting on the same page. Across the street from the rock pile pier is a property owned by Waldo Russo. And originally there was design there, the original zoning would allow for storage facilities, things of that nature. And there was a community of folks, which is Catullo Drive, that are right next to it. Yes, they knew when they put their houses in or bought their houses that was commercial development. Well, part of the new plan was for them to, on that property, to do a multiple use thing. And the folks on Catullo Drive had a problem with it. When I was chairman, I actually got us, over the period of 6 months, working with the folks that lived on Catullo Drive and Mr. Waldo, working towards what would work for him and what would work for the residents there. And what would go there would be senior housing. And that sort of thing. And the folks were ecstatic about, I'm going to say ecstatic, but they were very happy with that type of rezoning, let's say, because it would have been a change in zoning based upon the Route 1 West zone.
It wasn't senior housing, it was the 55, they were private
Right, 55 and
homes.
older. When I say senior,
Yeah,
right.
well,
But the thing
Age
is,
restricted.
and what I understand is that they're moving towards that now. But
Which would pay taxes.
Yeah.
absolutely. And so what was good about that is we got everybody involved. We had meetings at folks' houses. We had, and I just sort of saw myself as the vehicle to get everybody together and say, listen, we're all in this together. You guys live here, you guys want to develop, et cetera. Another piece of property that no one likes to talk about is the property when you first come in on Route 1 off to the right is the Sullivan property. And that's a type of development or type of land that should be developed in a positive vein. We talked about doing a campus-like setting. There's been some different folks that are interested in the past. Again, I know the economy is what it is right now, but that's the kind of stuff you talk about long range we should be looking at now, making decisions between all the boards, talking about based upon the current zoning, unless you want to change the zoning, but what's currently there, what's the vision, what do we see, and let's make it happen. Because that brings the dollars. And this is the stuff we plan, Jim. This is what's there. And you're not taking open space and destroying it. You're not taking something residential and turning it into commercial. We planned for this, so.
Yeah.
And I think, Jim, what this all points out, this discussion we just had, is that how all of these boards and commissions intersect and should be working with one another, and where the Board of Selectmen and the First Selectman have to just kind of make sure that they all are working together. And another thing that I would point out, if you look at the wealth of experience between the three of us, Board of Finance, Economic Development Commission, the P&Z, Board of Education, a number of years. We know how these boards work, and we know how these boards should coordinate with the Board of Selectmen.
You know, Joe, you raise an interesting point, and listening to the three of you dialoguing, we go back to the economic crisis that was hitting us a year ago, just about a year ago now. And it was actually the Republicans who were leading for that joint three-board meeting.
That's right.
And the meeting was set up to talk about the high school, ironically, but the meeting immediately turned into a discussion exactly like the three of you are having. And I think the joint board meetings that we have had since then have still only been focused on the school. And you guys are talking about, and it's something I'd like to get into in the time we have left, this whole concept of putting all this together into a framework, the long-range plan. All three of you have been commented and quoted across various media about the lack of a long-range plan. And Joe, why don't you address that and kind of connect all these dots for us and how this all fits in to the current fiscal situation?
Okay. We hear that we have, and we've been hearing for how long? We have all these long-range plans, and in fact, we do have plans. I mean, I mentioned them before. One under review, or right now, is a plan of conservation and development, which is in a process of being reviewed and brought up to date. There's the economic development plan, there's the Town Center South plan. And these are all plans about what we would like to do, okay, and what we think should happen. But they're not really chisel in stone plans, if we go, for considering our financial situation, if I will. We need long-range plans on when are we going to have to address replacement of facilities, okay? When are we going to have to address the replacement of major town equipment, like dump trucks and snow fighters and backhoes and fire engines and that sort of thing? We don't have that. We were told during the last campaign that, we have those plans.
Yeah.
I'm still looking for them. I haven't seen them. I mean, they must be pretty well hidden because I haven't seen them.
No, they're admitting now they don't have them.
Yeah. But this is what we have to do. Okay, it's good to have all these other plans. That's great. But we have to get practical now. And the reason we have to get practical is, we don't want to be hit in any budget year with a major capital replacement that we weren't aware of or we didn't plan for. And another thing that I'm proposing is that once we have this long-range plan in effect, we have to figure out how we're going to fund it, how we're going to pay for these items. And I have an idea which seems to be gaining a lot of support, is to put a one-time bonding issue. Similar, I keep saying, like the land acquisition issue, which we did about 8 years ago, was $5 million, and over a series of years, we drew down on that plan to purchase certain parcels of land. This would be the same type of bonding issue. We would get the approval of the voters for X number of dollars that we would need, let's say, for the next 5 years, whatever that number is. If the voters agreed, then we'd have that approval sitting there, and we wouldn't draw down on any of that money until it was time to replace certain equipment or facilities based on the plan.